So, I wanted to say a big thank you for requesting access to my emotional eating guide. I just really want to share with you my top two tips and a little bit of insight into emotional eating. For starters, if you do eat emotionally, I want you to know that you're not alone. Many people suffer from emotional eating, and it's really not gender specific. You see, emotional eating occurs just because we learned to use food as a coping mechanism. At some point in our life, there had been some sort of negative emotion, some sort of hard experience, and we happen to turn to food. And the interesting thing with food is that when we consume food, it actually gives us a dopamine hit. Dopamine makes you feel good, it's what drives addiction. No different to someone who takes drugs, experiences a dopamine hit, and then gets addicted to drugs. Food has a very similar effect. It activates the reward centers in our brain. And when we have experienced some sort of a negative emotion and then we have fed ourselves and we have that instant increase in mood, our brain just learns that to be a really effective mechanism for dealing with negative emotions. And the more we repeat that and the more that our brain builds a pathway to connect food with feeling happier, then we start to see emotional eating becoming something more prevalent in our life. So just know that emotional eating is not necessarily bad. Food is not bad. It's the way that we actually perceive it to be bad. It's the fact that we let it negatively impact our well being. You see, food is actually so beneficial for us. We need it for survival. And yet, it's something which a lot of us just fear. And it's more the fear around the lack of control. And the lack of control comes because we just simply don't have any other way to cope other than to turn to food. We can feel really out of control. And the first thing I want you to try to do is really try to change your perception of emotional eating. So, because we often view emotional eating as something to be ashamed of, we can be really self critical when we fall into these patterns. But one thing that has really helped me is to recognize that emotional eating isn't actually a bad thing, it's simply a coping mechanism. And it's one that has been learned and it can therefore also be unlearned. And it's really helpful to recognize that emotional eating, while it might make you feel terrible, it actually has served a really valuable purpose for you up until this point in your life. You can probably think of a lot of different situations in your life where food has really been a fantastic comfort for you. So instead of really shaming yourself for eating emotionally, just try to take a moment to thank all that food has done for you and know that this is just a cycle that you have learned and it's something that you can simply unlearn. But part of that comes from really dropping your judgment around it and developing new coping mechanisms. So, without further ado, the first thing I really encourage you to do is to take some time to look inwards and really acknowledge the difference between physical and emotional signs of hunger. So, I have outlined some differences here, being physical hunger has a real gradual onset, whereas emotional is very sudden. Physical hunger feels urgent, whereas emotional feels non urgent, whereas emotional hunger feels really urgent. When we're physically hungry, we don't tend to crave any particular food. We just need a wider variety and something satiating, whereas when we're emotional eating, we're really craving a specific sorts of food. When you're feeling physical hunger, you might feel things like dizziness, stomach rumbling, low energy, headaches. However, with emotional eating, there's not really any physical cues as such. When you eat for physical hunger, you also feel satisfied upon eating. But when you are emotionally eating, you're just never satisfied and you just keep going back for more and more. So once you're really able to identify and notice whether you are physically hungry or whether you are emotionally hungry, you can start to make some movement forward. So the first thing I want you to do when you notice that you are coming back for food again and again and again is put in a stop. And I want you to ask yourself, am I actually hungry? Take a moment, just put a pause between reaching for the food and give yourself a chance to think. Tune into your body. What signs do you notice before you go to emotionally eat? You see, the first thing to overcoming emotional eating is just awareness of emotional eating, recognizing how frequently we do it, what emotions are driving us to do it, where are we when we do it. So that's the first sign, the first little task for you to work on for this week. Now, once you become aware of when you emotionally eat, what you're going to do next is start to develop your coping mechanism toolbox. So, at times we find ourselves turning to food to manage our emotions because we just haven't learned an alternate coping mechanism. Food offers a really quick dopamine boost and it numbs our negative experiences. However, it's a really fleeting experience and it leads to you just seeking out more calorie rich foods to get that next dopamine hit. So we have to develop healthier coping mechanisms. You can consider activities such as taking a walk out in nature, meditation, journaling, deep breathing, engaging in mindful painting, reaching out to a friend, spending time with a pet, enjoying a relaxing evening at home. You might treat yourself to a massage or put exercise into your routine. What's really important is that the coping mechanisms that you develop might not work for another person. So you really have to take time to explore different coping mechanisms and make your own little toolbox of things that help for you. You also might notice that depending on the reason that you are emotionally eating, the coping mechanism that you need may have to change. So, for example, if you're eating because you're lonely, then you might find helping out a friend, reaching out to a friend to be more helpful. But if you are reaching out for food because you are tired, you might find something like meditating or taking a nap to be a really helpful coping mechanisms. So you're going to develop your own coping toolbox and display this somewhere that you can see it. So next time you go to eat emotionally, you're going to put a stop in and you're going to say, am I hungry? And if you're not hungry, you're going to try to ask yourself, what emotions are coming up for me? What am I actually feeling? And why am I trying to turn to food for a coping mechanism right now? Once you've identified the reason that you are emotionally eating and what negative emotion is actually arising, you turn to your coping toolbox and your list of strategies for the various emotions, and you're going to start to try one after another until you feel the urge to emotionally eat reduce. Now, if you try this and you still want to go and eat, then give yourself permission and just drop the judgment around that and allow yourself to sit mindfully and really enjoy the food. So, just one thing I really want you to think is that turning to food is actually an avoidant tactic. Okay, it's because we don't want to deal with whatever emotion is coming up, and you're never going to overcome emotional eating until you learn to sit with those really damn hard emotions. Society often pressures us to think that we have to be constantly happy, and it doesn't really give us room to embrace the inevitable lows that are going to happen as part of the human experience. It is completely normal to have emotional feelings come up, negative feelings come up. It is okay to feel uncomfortable at times. We don't need to turn to food to mask them. So instead of seeking immediate gratification for food, just sit in your discomfort and really think about what is coming up for you. Embrace, have a cry, let yourself become attuned to your emotions and to your body. There is an underlying message. And I think the beauty of emotional eating is to recognize that when you are falling into those patterns, it's because something is being neglected inside of you. So instead of thinking emotional eating is a terrible thing to be ashamed of and getting stuck in a binging cycle, next time you go and do eat emotionally, just ask yourself, oh, what's coming up for me? What am I not noticing about myself? Emotional eating is just a sign for you to slow down and to make time to deal with your emotions. So try to think of it like that next time you find yourself eating emotionally. And I think you'll find that this strategy will really help. Practice makes perfect, though. You're not going to undo years of learnt habits in a night. So keep consistent at this. Pull this resource out anytime you need. Watch this video, and please do reach out if you need any personal assistance.